Hey guys, Youngblood with you, and today I wanted to cover a really big topic, which is the medical gameplay implementation in 3.15. And I say it is a big topic because there are a ton of changes, but it is also a very in-depth topic that has a lot of nuance, so get strapped in because we have a lot to cover. I'll also give the big caveat here that while 3.15 is new, it is also crash-tastic, meaning that getting footage for a lot of this has been an absolute chore. And while I've been able to test things in various patches and capacities and in ETF prior to this, and I have a lot of content to talk about, being able to show you everything means it's a little bit more difficult, and I may need to wait to show some of it visually until things become a little bit more stable. But the information is very important to those that are trying to figure everything out, so we're going to talk through the details now, regardless of the ability to showcase the gameplay in a better manner. Hopefully that makes sense as to why we're taking this approach. So let's just start with covering the different types of damage a player can take in the universe. The first concept to dive into is really going to be wear versus your overall HP or your health pool. Wear is really more of a future state issue when there's more consequences to dying. But you at least get the first flavors of that with the looting that's taking place in this patch, meaning that when you die, regardless of what was equipped, you lose your items, meaning that there's finally a more significant cost to dying, which is to some degree the cost of the items that you've lost, but more importantly, it's the time it takes to go around and collect them from the various sources. Dying means more. Your HP, or your hit pool, is the amount of damage your avatar can sustain before dying or going into a state where you need to be recovered. HP can be restored by means of medicine or medical tools or medical beds. And when you take damage, your overall HP and specific body part HP start to drop. Healing your body through various means will show that your HP will increase again, but wear persists for longer. Regardless of how much you've been healed through drugs dealt via medical gun or injector pens, you still need to deal with the wear state on your body, which can only be remedied by a medical bed at a hospital or in top-tier medical chips. Once you have sustained enough wear damage, regardless of how much you try to heal yourself, you will start to be injured, and the wear will tick down on your performance, meaning you need more significant medical interventions to be able to get back up to full speed. Looking at the injury types, you really have three different types that can plague you. A tier 3 injury is a minor injury, the type that doesn't really impact your movement and is not life-threatening, but will eventually require treatment because the wear state of living with this damage will make this a more significant injury that you will need to address with further action. A tier 2 injury is a moderate one, which is shown through the damaged body parts showing appropriate symptoms. Think of those as leg damage yielding limping or slower movement, or arm injuries leading to worse recoil control of your weapons. A chest injury at this level will mean that you have less stamina for running, and if it's your head, you may get blurry vision. These are generally manageable conditions, but they do make you a less effective operator in the world. If a tier 2 injury is not addressed, you will eventually bleed out, leading to a down state and eventually death. I look at these as kind of finish the goal you're trying to accomplish, but don't completely abandon the progress. But you need to be smart about your HP and how your performance is impacted and address them as well in a short manner if needed to be able to finish the mission. Getting beyond that, though, is where you start getting into like a tier 1 injury or a severe injury. And these are where your body parts have taken enough damage to the point to force you into a prone or lying position. If you don't get help quickly, either by medical pen, gun, or somebody dragging your butt to a medical bed, you will bleed out and pass out. This is where you will enter the unconscious state, which is where you black out and you're going to lose control of your avatar. Now, once you enter this state, you can still trigger a beacon for players to come and help you, or eventually, hopefully, just ask for help from your organization. But if you don't get help, you will die where you lie because you're going to bleed out. It is also worth noting that if you're lying there, sending off a beacon, and you're not able to do anything, you're not just like there perpetually safe. You know, someone can come by and give you that coup de grace or that kiss of death and actually kill you by dealing more damage. And there just isn't anything you can do about it because you are incapacitated. This is where things like reputation and pressing charges are likely going to be more important, because a player that incapacitates you and leaves you able to be recovered versus someone who just kills you outright may end up being someone you see very differently in your eyes. There is an additional and alternative state that you can enter in the damage state model, which isn't necessarily a step in that progression, but it's the overdose state. And this is where you've received too many drugs and your blood drug level, or BDL, exceeds 100%. The higher your BDL, you're going to start showing symptoms such as blurred vision, staggering, and basically other just drunk type effects. So while sometimes those are artifacts of necessity to keep you alive, it could also be an indicator of the overall talent of the medical professional taking care of you, or how well you know to apply the medicines. A trained medic may know that certain doses they can give you will apply the certain types of fixes that will maybe make it so you don't bleed out right away and you don't die, but you're also not going to be completely unable to really operate in the mission that you're trying to do. Because once you get to an overdose state, you will eventually lead to your HP starting to run out, which will mean that you will eventually die from that as well. Players start to show overdose effects once the BDL approaches about 70%. And there is a drug that can help to stabilize your BDL that we will discuss shortly. But that is also requiring that your medic has this on hand to be able to give that to you, or you're carrying it in your bag. Even if you're in an overdose state, regardless of the injuries that you have and if they've been addressed, you will still need to be hit with the resurgent dose to allow you to recover. Now, when we look at the options for healing a player, there's several that can be used. The most effective and comprehensive option for healing is by far the medical beds. The medicine that is provided from the different options have different efficacies, with the beds lasting the longest and the injectable medical pens being the shortest, meaning the length of time the drugs have their effect is directly related to the quality of the solution that's administering the medicine. Medical beds also have different tiers of their own, starting with the lowest of the Tier 3 bed, which is really only able to cure Tier 3 injuries, which we've already outlined as the lowest level of injury. These are the beds that are currently available on the Cutlass Red, which is really an ambulance, which is designed to get you to a better medical facility where you get your actual care. What that means is that a Cutty Red could be a good option to fix you up from minor injuries, but if you have this around as your only healing option, it could mean that you need to bow out of your operation sooner, because taking more damage could mean that your healing option could be outclassed by your damage that you take by sticking around for longer in that fight. It's also worth noting and taking a moment to talk about the Apollo here, because it is a configurable medical ship that hopefully we see soon, but is not in the game yet. There's two sides of the medical area on the Apollo, meaning that each side can bring either 3 Tier 3 beds, 2 Tier 2 beds, or 1 Tier 1 bed. And that means when you look at Tier 3 beds, if you want to include the Apollo, you could have 1 Tier 1 or 2 Tier 2 beds and still have 3 Tier 3 beds on board if you configure it that way, which would mean it's relevant for the Tier 3 beds that we're discussing right now. Regardless, the Apollo is a really interesting option to consider for all medical bed situations because of that customization range that it has. A Tier 2 bed can heal Tier 2 and Tier 3 injuries, meaning it can save a life if you're bleeding out, but if you've yet to enter the most critical state where you're kind of downed. Ships that we think have Tier 2 beds are going to be the Apollo with an appropriate configuration, but also the 890 Jump and the Carrack. Then we get into the Tier 1 beds, which are your hospital class beds, which again include the Apollo, but also the Endeavour Hope, which is the hospital ship. Tier 1 beds are also available on most space stations and planetary hospitals on Microtech and Crusader, which are at the landing zones, and eventually at Lorville and Area 18, you'll see those being available too. They're just not implemented in the game yet. These are important to know because you may be keeping someone alive via drugs, but if you want them to live long term, you need to get them to the hospital for actual healing, and you need to do that before you can't just do it without overdosing them either. Finally, a perk to the beds is the ability to restore a blood drug level back to normal level pretty quickly, which is done at about 15% per second, meaning that if someone is overdosing, getting them to a bed is a quick way to not only address the overdose, but also fix the ailing conditions. Now, as you step down from the beds, you end up entering getting into the category of the actual medical gun. A medicine that's applied from the medical gun will last longer than that of lower options that we'll discuss, but it lasts less time than the dedicated medical beds. This is basically your best option for healing a player when you're out in FPS missions on foot. If you want to be a medic, this is your best tool to ensure survival of your team. But the medical gun has a very short range, so you need to be close, about 6 feet from your target, but it will automatically provide the appropriate dosing of medicine that's needed to address the issue at hand. Now, I say automated because it'll give you the right drugs to fix the problem, but it may not always give you the right mix for the situation. So that's where becoming a little bit of a pro becomes, a factor. You'll also be able to see how their BDL is to know how far you can push them before things become overdosed. And to the point I just made, you do have the option to flip between a simple or an advanced interface, which doesn't really change how you interact with a player, but it will provide more information on what you're giving to a player. And if you know the drug types, you will be able to know what those impacts are and give people an appropriate amount to get through whatever they need to. Additionally, well, not really additionally, but to do that, it's really just a little toggle, on the top that you can flip back and forth to get into the appropriate mode to be able to move forward. But the real goal there is just to be able to find a way to get somebody healthy enough to get into a bed where they're going to get the actual fix, without actually overdosing them. You do that really by manually manipulating the sliders, which means you can kind of give that touch and go relief as well without injecting everything at default amounts, which can lead to some unintended consequences. Thus, you are providing better care. This medical gun is the best option for providing care to a person who takes damage on a ship that doesn't have a medical facility, or maybe you're running back to engineering where a big problem is taking place. Maybe you're talking about just doing a mobile evacuation and you're trying to heal people as they run back to ships, or just in general as the medical person in your organization. The accuracy of dosage of medicine is the best you can get in a handheld device and is all encompassed in a one medical gel attachment and refill that you will need to take care of players. This will give you a readout of how long the drugs and the appropriate effects will last on the target you're providing care to as well. And it's also worth noting that the medical gun can be used on yourself, so regardless of whether you're helping others, it still has value to patch yourself up. Giving yourself a medical pen will give you a large dose. And that may end up exceeding what you need. So if what you're really looking at from an option perspective is wearing armor that gives you an additional sidearm, or maybe potentially foregoing the sidearm and just equipping the medical gun on your hip versus having to dig through your inventory in a hurry to try and get the right thing out of the backpack to find the right medicine, it all could just mean that if you have the medical gun on your hip, you pull it out, you hit B, you point the gun at yourself, you have faster fixing and healing, which is a huge win and gives you the additional readout information on yourself. As we work our way down the ladder, we get to the Greycat multi-tool, which now has a medical attachment, which is a great option for those of you that are taking on a variety of roles. If you're like me, the tractor attachment is typically the one that you use. It's the most practical one overall. But having an attachment for medical in your inventory makes the most dynamic option for medical gameplay to keep on hand. Inventory in 3.15, if you haven't played yet, is precious because the storage space is limited and what you buy is only available where you buy it unless you actually bring it along with you. So not bringing a full medical gun and instead just being able to pack the right attachment, which uses less space, is going to really mean that you may have a better option for healing yourself and others, but not at the cost of overall effectiveness, while being able to maintain some, inventory control. The medicine delivered from this source will last less time than the medical gun or the medical beds, but is still better than the medical pens. The catch here is with this attachment is that it can't inject all medicine types, so the usefulness is more limited. But also the screen and display give you far less information than the dedicated medical gun, so things like overdose and timing become more of a gamble. The good news, though, is for self-care is that you're still able to see your own BDL, even though you can't see other players, meaning that you still have a better chance of not overdosing yourself than using injectable med pens over and over again. Now, speaking of medical pens, the real goal of these is just to administer healing options to yourself. The catch here is that you can't really tell how much that you're injecting, so it's all just knowing the limits of your character and what they can handle and understanding your overall HP and what impact your drugs may cause to that. These are really best suited for short-term fixes until you can get yourself to someone with a medical gun or even better, a medical bed to properly heal. This is the fastest option to deploy, assuming that hotkeys are assigned and known and that you have the appropriate drug in your bag. So it makes the best option for taking damage in a firefight and just saving your ass to keep fighting, and the understanding that you may have some unintended consequences of the medicine to deal with. You can technically use medical pens on others to help save them if you know what their symptoms are and help relieve those symptoms. However, you don't really have any idea of what their HP is and their BDL, so it's way more likely for you to cause an overdose in a friend. The best rule of thumb is that medical pens will give you about a 21% BDL increase. So the fifth pen that you give to somebody is going to put them into an overdose state. The more blood you lose, though, the more this ratio is going to be changing. So not having accurate readout of the patient means that this can be risky to do. And overall, the medicine from a med pen is going to last about 15 minutes. So that gives you the general idea of how long you have to get them to better care before you need to really roll the dice and give them more medicine or get them to a better solution for healing. The current state of the game, in PTU at least, means that others can give you medicine whether you want to get it or not, which means that others can overdose you, which is a crappy experience and can lead to death if you're not prepared to deal with it. This really should be a consent model where you get a pop-up to accept treatment, at least in armistice zones, or even more ideally, just limit it to party members who can kind of help you by default. As we kind of cover med pens specifically, which I mentioned are really only best used on yourself, there are several types of medical pens, so getting to know the drugs they administer and how they impact things is important. The most familiar type of med pen is, well, the med pen, which administers the drug Hemazole. And Hemazole is responsible for stopping bleeding, it recovers players from an incapacitated state, and restores some level of HP. Hemazole is sort of the outlier when it comes to BDL, since it does provide direct HP regen. You do tend to regain about 0.065% to BDL per health percentage point regained. So it is more dynamic than the other drugs, which give you that previously mentioned 21% BDL increase. What that means, though, is that the more damaged a player is, the more regen is possible, and thus the more BDL, the more injured you are, which I'm assuming is associated to having a lower total blood pool and higher percentages of the drug in your system as a result of that ratio. You also have to remember that you're not just fixing the wound, you're masking the symptoms, so you can help restore some HP and make the player perform better, but until you actually fix the problem or address their wear, you still have a lower HP pool as a player. The opio pen, which gives the drug Roxafen, which I kind of hate how much all of these actually sound like real drugs, temporarily gets rid of locomotion-related injury impacts. The opio pen, which means that limping and staggering is going to be reduced, and things like arms or prone lock, as well as the sound effects from pain, which can give away your position, are going to be silenced. Then we get to the corticopen, which gives the medicine Sterogen. This is going to help alleviate reduced stamina, reduced melee attack force, hides the blood vision on your visor, as well as the sound effects associated with chest injuries, like your character wheezing. Beyond that, we get to the Adrenapen, which has the medicine Demexitrine inside, which will help fix your reduced movement speed, weapon sway, and delays to aiming down sights. It also helps with your reaction to force, so you're less prone to being knocked down and helps with stun time recovery. And then the last med pen is the one we talked about already. It's the Detox pen, which gives the drug Resurgia. And this is what can help to combat overdose in a player. It recovers the BDL to a more stable state, assuming they have yet to enter an incapacitated state. You or your target will still take damage to their HP during an overdose until that BDL reaches stable levels. However, you can regain stability sooner by giving this drug. Resurgia will burn the overdose by about 0.1% every 3 seconds or so, giving you an idea of how quickly you need to give this drug. And even if you get someone with to a medical bed to be able to burn through some of the overdose state, unless they actually fix their ailing conditions, the underlying reasons they took medicine in the first place, they're still going to wake up with other issues to address. So they need to pick the right healing options from the bed. Long story short, there's a lot of medicine in the game right now, so if medical gameplay interests you, you need to really lean into it, learn what all the medicines do, what the impacts are, and how best to give them. There are a couple of other gameplay changes to address here as we look at medical gameplay as a whole. First off, if you die now, you respawn at the nearest hospital, which in many cases is going to be on stations and rest stops. These locations tend to have pharmacies where you can put the majority of the medical guns, attachments, refills, and pens, buy them, stock up on them, get them into your inventory, take them on ships, put them in your on your person. In the situation where you're keeping a player alive and you're trying to get them to help, you can actually just take them to a planetary location that has a hospital, which is currently only New Babbage or Orison, though eventually Lorville and Area 18 are going to be included as well. And then some of the stations as well. Once you land in the hangar, you will see a side elevator that has the hospital cross over the top, which if you drag a body onto that gurney, they can be taken to help, meaning they won't die, and they can start requesting services as soon as they're laying down. From that point, the player will have the option to select the type of care that they want to receive, and boom, you've completed the gameplay loop of keeping somebody alive until they can survive from a more complete care option. If you have taken some minor damage and you want to get yourself fixed up, you can go to a hospital, either at a station or a planet, and there will be a terminal there where you will ask for help. From there, you'll get checked in and you'll get a room assignment. This is a self-service affair, and it will tell you what room to proceed to. On most stations, this will be on the floor that you're already on. However, on planets, the facilities are very large, and you're going to need to take an elevator to the floor and then find the room where you can access, select your services, lay down, and get taken care of. Additionally, we have the idea of the imprint, which is where you will manage your respawn location should you end up dying. By default, you will set your location to the primary residence, meaning if you choose New Babbage for your home, that's where you're going to try to respawn again if possible. That being said, proximity to other locations mean you could spawn elsewhere, or you can manually set the imprint to default to a location based on your imprint at either an insurance or regeneration station available in hospitals and clinics, which many times have their own kiosks to manage this. However, you can always just go and opt to lay down in a bed or interact with the terminal at the foot of the bed to be able to get this menu to pop up and transfer your stuff. Overall, this is basically a Tier 1 implementation of medical, but it adds a lot of depth to the game and is an important step. Understanding how to keep yourself and others alive is important, and having the right tools and understanding of how to use them and when is going to be critical, specifically for the medics out there. But really just for anybody that wants to live another day in the verse. I know the visual information here was a little bit lacking based on the limitations of game stability, but with that being said, there will be more action footage coming in the future to help cement some of the information provided here. So I really hope, it was a lot of information, that this content has helped you understand how to stay alive and fight another day in the verse. So with that in mind, subscribe to the channel and set reminders to get reminded when new content comes out. Consider backing the channel on Patreon or through YouTube memberships if you appreciate what I do. Otherwise, I appreciate you all watching. Have yourselves a wonderful day, and take care.